What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode. So in this video I am basically just picking up right where I left off and just continuing on working on the wiring. So at this point I already have installed the harness back into the car. I know. So the reason why I did that is just because the last time that I had it out I actually did a lot of modifications to the harness. So I didn't want to just go straight to sleeving everything up, heat shrinking and all that stuff, then to come back and find out something just wasn't fitting or there was just something wrong with it. So there are a couple things that I want to work on. I want to work on some mounting points for the wiring. I also want to take care of any other like excess connectors or anything like that that are still in the harness, and I mainly just want to finalize everything and just route everything where it is going to be routing through. That way I can be 100% sure that every length is correct whenever I go to actually sleeve the wiring. So let's just get right into it. Alright, so this weekend I am not wasting any time. I'm getting right into it. So at the moment I have already gone through and just put the wire harness back inside. So at this point what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to like plug it up to every single thing that I am going to be running, or every single thing that I am looking to run on the car in the future. And basically those are now just short enough to fit through that hole right there on the firewall. I don't think I mentioned this before. I did kind of want it to be a surprise, but I am actually going to be ordering some bulkhead connectors, kind of like those like mil-spec connectors or Deutsch connectors, but I'm just going to call them bulkhead connectors because that's all it is. So at the moment, that's why I kind of just left these a little bit longer, just because they are going to be getting cut way shorter there to go into that bulkhead fitting. I just went through and got all the connectors through that actually connect to the fuse box. So that's going through there, so those will plug up just fine. Oh yeah, and then I did also put the dash fuse box, so you can kind of see it's nice and tucked out of the way. Another thing here is I do have a little bit of excess wire, like cable, and what I am planning on doing is just kind of wrapping that cable in a coil behind this plate, just so I can have some spare wire to play with, just in case I need it to go longer that way, this way, or that way, you know. So at the moment what I'm working on is just plugging everything up. Along with plugging everything up, anything that I see that I'm not using that I missed before, I am like clipping that out, getting it out of the harness. And also another thing that I'm doing is before I cut anything out or I modify it, I do have the CB7 Haynes book, so I am using that for the wiring diagram. So before I cut anything out, I do actually check the diagram just to kind of make sure that I'm okay to cut it out without taking out any like major functions, you know. Alright, and another thing I took care of as well, I drilled a hole with the hole saw through that, and also through this side here, and that's just so I can route this cable through, kind of tuck it out of the way, just because I do have this blocked off right there. So yeah, so that's taken care of. And then I went through and kind of plugged up all of the lights and everything like that. So the only thing I'm missing is just the little bottom like turn signal, but that's on the bumper, but I know it'll reach that. Like, I mean, look how long this is. I mean, everything fits up. You can see it's connected. In here I basically just have the headlight cable going out that hole, this one going down here. I can plug it up. And another thing I did test as well, I was concerned with, is the bumper. So the bumper support gets bolted right here. You can see these 3 bolt holes right here. So that's where the bumper support goes, and this stays out of the way perfectly fine. So at the other side, there's this, and even the fan. Like, the fan fits with excess cable. So if you guys are looking to do like a mild like wire tuck on a CB, it's really, really easy. Really, really straightforward. You don't have to extend any of these side cables here, or at least I didn't have to. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue working on this. I'm gonna get back to you guys when I have an update here. So on the passenger side, behind the actual like ECU mount and stuff, this is kind of what it's looking like. So yes, this is looking like a mess, but it's gonna be really easy to manage at this point. So basically, this is the harness going back to the fuel pump. I just kind of have these wires tied up right now just because these are all going to the fuse box. Then basically from here, you have all these, like you have this relay right here. I forget what the relay's for. And then you have this ground source along with this ground as well. So all of these things are going to be grounded up, probably like up here somewhere. And this is what I was talking about as far as just kind of keeping like a bundle of excess wire. I'll probably just tie this up, and of course all of this is going to be loomed, so I mean it's going to be nice and, you know, like wrapped up and everything. But yeah, there's going to be some excess wire, kind of like a little pretzel right here, and I'm just going to keep this mounted behind the actual like panel, so you don't really see that. Then over here on this side, I basically have it's just going to be coming off the side. I want to try to get this part of the harness as high as possible. I want to try to run it up here if possible, but the only thing that's going on right now is this is really short, like the ECU part. So if I move this up, the ECU wires won't really be able to reach down to where the ECU is. So this is kind of like the highest I could have it at the moment. As far as the rest of the harness that's kind of going under the pedals and stuff, when it's finally mounted or when it's finally installed, that isn't going to route through there. I'm actually going to be routing the harness up here, kind of like snaking it through here, and then over the actual like pedal assembly through there over to the under dash fuse harness. So at this point I am really happy with kind of like how this is being routed and how everything is kind of just like working, you know. There's not too much that I'm gonna have to like extend or shorten, so that's really awesome. But at this point what I am doing is going through and zip tying it and cleaning up all the wiring, trying to get it as tight as possible. And from there, the next thing that I'm doing is trying to make myself mounting points. So obviously like this wiring is just kind of hanging, but when it's finally mounted, I want it to be nice and tight up against here, you know. So I'm gonna start making myself some mounting points where I'm going to mount all the wiring. Because again, when I take it out this time, I'm really hoping this is the last time I ever have to take it out until the car's driving, you know. I gotta really make sure that everything is going to be perfect, you know. So I'm just gonna continue with this process, making sure I have all my branch points perfect, making sure I have all the lengths perfect, and then I have some mounting points. And once I have that, then I'm gonna get started on working on the dash harness, because the dash harness is just something I really haven't touched, and I'm still not too sure what like buttons and switches and everything I'm going to be running on the dash. So I need to establish that first. Once I know everything that I am going to be running, then I could bring all those buttons and switches over here, plug them up, and then anything that I'm not using, I can remove it, reroute it, or do what I need to do. So yeah, so I'm just going to continue working on this. I'll get back with you guys when I have an update. Alright guys, and this is how the wiring is looking at the moment. I just kind of mounted it in place with all the little mounting tabs that I have so far. And then yeah, so it's all mounted up, and then I just went through and kind of like made sure I zip tied all the branch points. Oh, and then I did same thing to this side as well. So you can kind of see it's all mounted up nice and secure. So if you guys remember in like the first wiring video, I explained that this car originally comes with an external ignition coil, and I did convert it to a distributor with an internal coil. And in order to do that, you basically just take the ignition coil plug and then put a 30 amp fuse on it, and that basically loops it. So since I found out that that did work, I didn't want to keep that plug in the engine bay with the fuse on it. So I routed it back over here and kind of just rerouted the wire, and basically this is the wire right here that's going to power the internal ignition coil. I just put like a little inline fuse connector on it, so now I could just put my fuse on there and protect that. Alright, so what I'm working on right now is drilling out the holes for all the power cables. So basically the cables that are going to be powering and recharging the fuse box, and there's just going to be one cable that's going from the breaker back over to the kill switch. Because I'm putting holes in this and I'm going to run these cables through, I'm actually going to run them with grommets. So I'm just putting the grommet on right now, and then I'm measuring the kind of like the diameter, outside diameter of this inside little groove where the grommet is going to rest inside this hole, just so I can know what size hole to drill here. Let's start off with this one. So I mentioned this in part 1 or 2, but as far as all the power cables, I just went to O'Reilly's and got these like pre-made like battery cables. These are 4 gauge, and I'm not a really big fan of like the terminals they use. So this side, they have these huge lugs on them that all of this stuff would be conductive. So I don't necessarily want that, and especially when I'm plugging it up to like the starter and the battery and all that, that just makes a huge thing, a huge contact point that's easy to short. So I do not want that. So I am going to be buying my own like terminal, like eyelet terminals. So from there, I am gonna need to kind of like cut all these cables to length exactly the way I want. But the only problem with that is I have not 100% decided where I'm mounting this battery. So I do have like 3 options at the moment. So I'm kind of thinking of laying it with the terminals facing this way on the seat area right here. Maybe even standing up right against the seat, kind of like flat up against how it is standing right now, or laying on its side right here on the floor area with the terminals facing forward or backward. Either way it could work. So with the main power cable, I think I'm gonna route it this way, kind of like on the inside of this tunnel instead of on the outside, but I'm gonna route it this way. Then it's gonna go and then power the circuit breaker. Then from the other circuit breaker, it's gonna come kind of like this cable in the back. Then it's gonna go back to the kill switch, and then from the kill switch it branches off into 2. So one's gonna go over to the starter, and then one cable will go behind the fuse box mount and then come out of this hole. Then it's gonna power the fuse box, and then that hole right there is for the alternator recharge cable. So that's gonna be coming out, going behind the panel, and then come out there to the recharge. So yeah, I'm really excited. At this point, all of the wires except for the dash harness are, this is how they're going to be basically, just wrapped up and a lot better looking than this, I promise. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started on the dash harness now. So I'll get back with you guys when I have an update here. Alright guys, so I'm back at it, and I'm basically just going to pick up where I left off yesterday, and I'm just going to work on the actual like dash harness, just because this is the only one I haven't really done much with. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys like some of the things that I'm doing to kind of like cut down the harness, and then just kind of remove the things that I don't want in the harness. So basically what I went ahead and did is just kind of plugged up all the things that I'm going to have here. So obviously the cluster, I do have it connected on all 3 parts. Here's the cruise control right there, so I got that connected. This has been connected, but I went through and then just connected up the like the AC controls. So that's all plugged up, and then the hazard switch and the defroster. So defroster I'm not going to use. I'm going to keep the button in there just to kind of fill up that plug. I'm not going to have this harness or this connector in here. So I am going to be removing this harness or this connector. I'm going to be removing these 2 connectors right here. This connector is already like pretty much cut, but this is the connector for the actual like heater blower or the AC blower or something. I'm not exactly sure, but this was something for the AC. So I'm going to get this out of here, and then I'm going to get this cruise control. At this point on this side, this plugs up to the under dash fuse box. This plugs up to like the chassis harness. These two connections actually plug up to the rest of the harness right there. So then this is for the stereo. I actually am going to be keeping the stereo, but I'm going to be cleaning up this mess. I promise I didn't do this. This was from like a previous owner, but the main part is just removing those connectors. So yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started, get right into it. So I basically just clipped the connector off because I have no intention of ever using this in the future, so I don't need that. And basically just ran the wires back through and try to bring them back to their like origin basically, or where they're coming back to. So right here you can kind of see that there's just a power wire. So this is just some sort of power wire, and it's getting spliced between 3 different points, so it gets spliced into 3. And you'll kind of notice, like if you start working with the factory harness, that there's a lot of splicing going on. Just kind of keep that in mind. That does kind of complicate things whenever you are trying to tuck, or whenever you're trying to like relocate connectors to a different part of the harness. So now there's nowhere for this to connect to. This is gone, this connector's gone, so just kind of keep that in there like that for reference. I'm just going to go ahead and continue working on these. So I'm going to get the defroster out of here because I don't have a defroster anymore. Alright, so I just went through and got rid of some connectors and stuff that I'm not going to be using. So got rid of all that, and then here's just some excess wire. Yeah, and then this is what we are left with here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start removing all of the factory electrical tape everywhere, and I'm just going to start zip tying it up how I have the rest of the harness. So yeah, so there's the dash harness ready to go. I'm just going to go through a couple last minute things with all of the wiring. So I'll go ahead and continue working on a couple little things here, and I'll get back to you guys when I have an update. Alright guys, getting back to you with an update. So I have already started kind of sleeving up the dashboard harness. So you can kind of see that has this braided sleeve. Alright, so basically what I am doing right now is I'm using this Kapton tape. So it's this tape. I have like a bunch of rolls of it, a bunch of different thicknesses. I'll put a link in the description to that. But basically with this tape, this is just kind of what I'm using as an alternative to electrical tape, because I really hate electrical tape. I hate that residue that it leaves behind, and I honestly don't really think it even sticks that well. I actually did some research, and a lot of motorsport harnesses actually use Kapton tape, just because this has a really high heat resistance, and it has really low residue. So those are two things that I really like. So if you ever see like motorsports wiring, or you ever see like people doing it, you'll see that they're working with this tape here. So basically what I'm doing is I just went through, and basically everywhere where I have a zip tie, so everywhere where there's a branch point, I'm using this thin tape right here just to kind of keep the branch point tight. Then from there I put the sleeving on. Then over the sleeving I actually run a little bit of a thicker tape on there just to kind of keep it tight on there. And the reason for that is because I have sleeved some wires before, and I basically just did it without tape and only heat shrink on top of it. And what starts to happen is if you're not using like good quality heat shrink that has like that adhesive inside of it, it's not going to stick anywhere. So what's going to happen is you're going to have your sleeving, heat shrink over it, and then it's going to want to slide up and down on the wire. So what I'm doing is actually taping it down to the wire so it doesn't want to move back and forth. It's going to stay stuck there. And another thing, at this point I've been sleeving all of these with keeping the connectors on. So I've actually been able to run the sleeving over this without depinning the connectors. The only thing that I am going to have a hard time with, or I am going to have to depin, is for the heat shrink. For the dash harness though, honestly, I might just leave it like this, just with the exposed Kapton tape, just because, I mean, it's just going to be up on the dash anyway. It doesn't really need to be like that weather sealed, I guess. It doesn't need to be that sealed up. So I might not even heat shrink this, but if I do, I am going to have to like depin just to be able to get the heat shrink over these parts here. So, so I've gotten these done so far. I just need to do these two right here. Then I need to do this side of the harness, which this side's kind of looking like a hot mess. But I'm just going to continue on this process. I'll try to get this entire harness looking like this area here with the exposed ends of Kapton tape. But I'll go ahead and get the rest of this done, and I'll get back to you guys from there. And this is where the dash harness is right now. So I do have the majority of it already sleeved up. So you can kind of see there's a lot of it sleeved up right now. So the only parts of the dash harness that are just missing the sleeving are going to be just like little branch points, you know. So like this branch point right here, there's going to be this one right there, and then the ones that actually go to like the stereo and the chassis harness. So then from there, I also did already get started on the engine harness as well. So with the engine harness, I mainly took care of like the main branch, basically the main branch going all the way across, just because the wiring was actually really wide, so I could fit a really wide sleeving through, and then I could kind of fit it over all of these connectors and all these connectors here. So for the rest of these, all of these other branch points, since the wiring is really thin, I actually want to run a pretty slim sleeve through this. I kind of want to get it as tight as possible. So for these, I am going to have to unpin them and do it all from scratch, you know. So, and then as far as this stuff I'm not really touching, just because, like I mentioned, I am going to be running a bulkhead connector or a mil-spec connector on the firewall. But yeah, for that, I'm just waiting until I could actually get that connector in and start kind of like actually pinning it up, you know. But we're not there yet, so I'm just not really even going to worry about this. I will sleeve it up, make it all look good and stuff once I do cut the wires and put it on that mil-spec connector. Because once it's cut, I mean, I can just fit sleeving right over and it'll be really easy. So now that I've got the harness to this point, and I'm going to start unpinning and sleeving up the rest of the branch points, I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys from start to finish on this wire right here, this branch point. I'll show you guys from start to finish how I sleeve this, and yeah, we'll go from there. So I do kind of want it as tight as possible. So one of the first things I like doing is kind of trying to decide what sleeving I'm going to use, because I have all kinds of different sizes, but these are the 3 sizes I'm kind of looking at right there. And then what I do is I like to, instead of it being compressed and stretched out, I like to stretch it as much as I can. So then from there, just kind of place it, stretch it out, and put it to a branch point. So this is going to be the first segment of braided sleeve that I'm going to cut. So then what I do to mark it is just bend it, just because like you can't really like mark it with a marker or anything like that. But yeah, with the bend you can very clearly see where it is, and it also makes cutting it a little bit easier. I'll show you guys how I cut it right now. So yeah, so that's the first segment, and I'm just going to go from the other side to do the other segment. But yeah, with this I want to get it as tight as possible. So this, it may look like it's too small, but remember, it expands way bigger. So as long as once it stretches out, it's going to be nice and tight along that wiring, that's kind of the look I'm going for. And especially since this is going to be depinned, I don't need to worry about like having to try to fit it over connectors or anything like that. It should be really, really straightforward. And with this stuff, I would recommend like cutting it to like the exact length. Don't go over, don't go under. Well, maybe you can go under, but you don't want to go over just because it'll kind of get past like the branch points that you want. So there's my second length right there. Alright, so now that I got the 2 lengths that I want, the sleeves that I want, now we need to cut these. So, I mean, when you go to cut these, like if you're going to be doing this yourself and you go to cut these and you cut them with scissors, I wish you luck. Just because as soon as you cut them with scissors, this stuff's just going to fray like crazy. It turns into this, look, just so you guys can see. Like literally, as soon as you guys cut it and start trying to like mess with it, the sleeving just turns into this. So this stuff can be really annoying. This is kind of what you're going to be faced with. You're going to have a lot of fraying, and it's just going to be a nightmare to work with. So I wouldn't recommend cutting it with scissors or anything sharp. The recommended way to cut this stuff is with a hot knife. It's just a blade that gets heated up and just kind of melts through this and cuts it. It leaves it with this nice finish right here that won't fray. Even if you like, so with this stuff, if you cut it the right way with like melting the ends and stuff, you could even do this and it still won't fray. Like it will not fray. So you definitely want to be cutting it and melting the tips. So whatever you do, if you want to cut it with scissors and then just heat it up, melt it. But I'll show you guys what I did. So yeah, so this is what I'm using to cut the sleeving. Basically, I just went to Harbor Freight, got myself this little like wood burning kit, and this kit kind of comes with all these random tips and stuff. So I mean, any one of these you could honestly use. I was using this one. This one was working really well for me until I dropped it, and then the tip just broke off while it was hot. So that really sucks. So basically, at this point, I can't really use a tip because that thing's stuck in there. I probably could drill it out, but I don't really want to go through the trouble of that. This is working just fine for me. I just use the corner of this thing and it cuts through it like nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and let that heat up, and I'll show you guys how it cuts through this stuff. And there it is. Alright, so now that I got these both unpinned, I'm just going to go through and tape these down where I want them to be in place, get rid of the little zip ties that are chilling here, and once that's ready to go, I should be able to get my heat shrink on this and finalize that. Now that I have the little strips of tape laid down, kind of see, tying that down, tying it down right here, right there, and then over here. So it's all tied down. I have one wrapped around in the middle as well. So now I could actually tape the sleeving down to the actual harness, and then from there I could actually put my heat shrink over it and then heat shrink it. so I just got the heat shrink routed on the harness, so I'm just gonna go over to the heat gun and heat it up, and let's see how it stays. Alright guys, and this is basically the finished product here. So you can kind of see the ends all have heat shrink on them, so looking nice and sealed. I like it. And yeah, the heat shrink or the sleeving does not move. So I'm basically just gonna repeat this exact same process here on the rest of the wiring in the car. Alright guys, and here you go. I just finished the engine harness. So I mean, I'm honestly really excited about the way this came out. I really like the way this sleeving looks. I think it looks a little bit more like professional, a little bit more race inspired than the factory wiring harness. And I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg to get an aftermarket wiring harness. So yeah, this is just my custom wiring harness out of the Honda factory wiring. So, I think it came out good. Comment down below what you guys think. But really quick, I'm just going to go ahead and take the harness, install it onto the car, and let's check it out. Alright guys, and there is the harness installed on the engine. So I will kind of play around with this a little bit. So this is the part that's kind of staying like a mess, but once that's chilling, it'll be good. But yeah, you can kind of see the harness routing through there, and then back there you can't really see it. You can see the injector plugs. So the injector plugs are right there, the wiring for the alternator right there, and then you can see some of the wiring right here. So yeah, it's really tucked out of the way, and really stoked on how that looks, honestly. So there's that, and I really like how this braiding kind of blends in with the AN hoses. So yeah, so at this moment, all I'm waiting for is for the bulkhead connector to come in. That way I can actually start getting everything. I could get that whole cluster of wires all mounted onto that bulkhead connector, and all the wiring will be ready to go. Man, I'm honestly really happy with the way that came out. I honestly think it was worth spending that time, that extra bit of time. And I still haven't 100% figured out the mounting situation for the harness down here. But I mean, it should be pretty straightforward. I'll probably just put some tabs under the ITBs just to kind of mount it down there. And another thing, I haven't mentioned this already, but I am going to be getting some sleeving, some heat resistant sleeving for the wiring that's going to be back here right by the water neck. So I mean, that may be getting pretty hot. And then down there, the exhaust runs right through there. So there's going to be some heat in this area. I do just want to avoid any issues with the wiring and heat and anything like that. Oh yeah, another thing I haven't mentioned, I did also go through and bend my brake and clutch line for the last time. So this is kind of like the little design that I'm going for, just because I have gotten way more comfortable with bending lines, and now it's all stainless. So I really like the way this looks, just because both lines are kind of proportional with each other, kind of doing the same bends until they go their own separate ways. Alright, and there you go. The engine harness is done. The engine harness is in. I'm honestly really stoked on how that stayed. I think it looks pretty professional. So I just need to finish the rest of the wiring on the rest of the car, which I'm not really going to show you too much of that unless there is some important stuff to go over. So if you guys like the way the wiring stayed, if you guys are enjoying the progress of this CB7 build, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, and make sure you guys keep an eye out for the next video, because I am going to be setting up that mil-spec connector, or the bulkhead connector for the wiring. So I'm super excited for that. And yeah, see you guys in the next one. Later.